The land in Arizona Territory during the late 1870s was wide, open, and full of quiet beauty. The sky seemed endless, stretching over red earth, tall cactus, dry grass valleys, and distant blue mountains. The wind carried the smell of dust and sagebrush, and at night, the stars looked close enough to touch if someone climbed high enough on a ridge. This land could be harsh and dry, but to those who listened, it also offered peace and belonging. Many travelers and settlers passed through, but only a few truly understood the language of the desert. One of those few was a young cowboy named Samuel Carter. Samuel was not the kind of man people noticed at first glance. He was quiet, steady, and thoughtful. He rarely raised his voice, and he never tried to impress anyone. He had a strong build from years of ranch work, sun-browned skin and hands rough from rope and saddle. His dark hair was always a bit dusty from long rides, and his eyes carried a calm look, as if he had seen many hardships and learned to live with them. People who met him often described him as a man who minds his own business, and Samuel liked it that way. He grew up without much family. His parents had passed away when he was still a young boy, and he had been raised by ranchers who needed help more than they needed another mouth to feed. Samuel worked for his keep, learned to ride before he was 12, and became skilled with cattle by the time he was 16. He learned to survive by watching, listening, and respecting the land around him. He believed that the earth gave everyone what they needed if they treated it kindly. Samuel lived most of his life outdoors. He moved from ranch to ranch wherever work was needed. Nights were spent sleeping under the stars with only a blanket, his saddle for a pillow, and his horse close by. He did not complain about loneliness, but sometimes when the wind was still and the moon was bright, his heart felt a quiet ache that he never spoke aloud. He had no wife, no children, and no permanent home. He did not speak of it to others, but deep inside, he wished for something more than wandering work and passing friendships. Near the territory where Samuel often worked lived several Apache families. They were people of the land long before settlers arrived. They knew the mountains, the rivers, the hidden springs, and the paths of deer and birds. Their stories were tied to every stone and every breeze. However, during this time, life for Apache communities was changing. Borders were being drawn, hunting grounds were shrinking, and misunderstandings with settlers often led to deep tension. Many newcomers did not try to learn about the people who were already there. They acted with fear or anger, and this created more trouble. Samuel was different. He did not grow up hearing harsh words about the Apache. He learned to watch how people behaved and choose his own opinions. When he met Apache travelers near streams or trading spots, he did not turn away. He greeted them with respect. He listened when they spoke. He traded fairly when he could. In time, some of the Apache recognized that he was not a man who looked down on them. He was simply a man who worked hard and wished to live in peace. There was one group of Apache that Samuel crossed paths with more often than others. A small band led by an elder known to settlers only as Old Greyhawk. His real name and his language carried meaning connected to wind and morning light, but settlers used simple nicknames. Old Greyhawk was a calm and experienced leader, respected among his people. His hair was streaked with silver, and his eyes held a quiet wisdom. When he looked at someone, it felt like he saw not just the person, but the truth behind them. Samuel once met Old Greyhawk during a dry season when supplies were scarce. Samuel had extra flour and cornmeal from a delivery he had made, so he traded fairly without trying to gain more. The elder noticed Samuel's sincerity. Over the next few years, they crossed paths at trading camps, river crossings, and on the open plains. They spoke little at first, but each meeting carried unspoken respect. Samuel admired how the Apache moved with the land, not against it. He admired their patience and their quiet strength. He never tried to imitate them, but he learned small things by watching. How to read the tracks of animals in sand. How to know when weather was changing by the smell of the wind. How to sit silently and let thoughts settle like dust after a storm. The Apache elder, in turn, noticed something in Samuel as well. He saw a man who worked hard but carried loneliness inside him. He saw a man who did not treat others with pride or judgment. He saw a man who valued honesty more than wealth. In a world where many people took what they wanted without thinking of others, Samuel was different. The seasons continued to change, and life remained steady but quiet for Samuel. He drove cattle across long distances, repaired fences, tended to sick horses, and helped ranchers move from one grazing ground to another. Each day was filled with work, but his evenings were filled with silence. He often imagined what it might feel like to have someone to share a meal with, someone to talk to, someone who understood the rhythm of land and sky the same way he did. One early spring morning, Samuel was preparing for another supply run. He saddled his horse, tied bags of grain and tools to his pack, and began a long ride toward a trading post near the foothills. The mountains looked soft in the morning light, the land painted in pink and gold. A soft breeze carried the sweet scent of desert flowers just beginning to bloom. Samuel breathed deeply and felt a sense of calm. As he traveled, the land stretched out quiet and wide ahead of him. He passed a rocky ridge where he had often seen deer at dusk. He crossed a shallow stream where cool water reflected the open sky. He took his time, not rushing the moment. The land had taught him that life did not need to be hurried to have meaning. On the second day of his journey, he saw figures standing near a small clearing. As he rode closer, he recognized Old Greyhawk and several members of his band. Their expressions were calm, not surprised. It was clear they had been waiting for him. Samuel slowed his horse and approached with respect, offering a quiet greeting. Old Greyhawk greeted him in return and invited him to sit. What followed was not quick conversation. The elder spoke slowly, explaining the changes affecting his people. Food was harder to find, trading routes less safe, and cooperation with settlers becoming more necessary for survival. The elder explained how forming strong, respectful bonds could help both communities face a difficult future. Samuel listened carefully, feeling the weight of each word. He understood that this was more than simple talk. It was something meaningful, something that would change lives. The elder then spoke of a tradition, forming ties between families through marriage alliances when trust had been earned. It was not a forced idea. It was something discussed openly among those involved. It was meant to build cooperation, shared responsibility, and mutual support. Samuel sat quietly. He felt his heart beat slow and steady. This was unexpected, but it did not feel wrong. It felt like the wind changing direction after a long stillness. The elder's words were gentle, patient, and full of respect. Samuel could tell that great care had been taken before bringing this decision forward. This moment was the start of something that would shape the rest of Samuel's life, though he did not know how yet. Samuel sat on the warm ground beside Old Greyhawk and listened carefully. The elder spoke slowly, choosing every word with thought. His voice was steady, like someone who had lived many seasons and learned to speak only when the moment required it. The others in the group sat nearby, quiet and attentive, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. The elder explained that his people had been facing increasing challenges. The land that once provided everything they needed was becoming harder to depend on. The rivers ran thinner, the game moved further away, and trading paths that once felt safe were now full of uncertainty. The world around them was changing quickly, and not always in ways that felt fair or peaceful. Yet instead of reacting with anger, this group of Apache believed in seeking paths of cooperation whenever possible. Old Greyhawk told Samuel that he had watched him for years, not in a suspicious way, but in a mindful way. He had seen how Samuel spoke to others, how he worked, how he treated animals, how he respected the land. He had seen many settlers who acted with fear or loud pride, people who wanted the land but not the responsibility that came with understanding it. Samuel was different. He approached everything with patience. He listened more than he spoke. He did not carry himself as if the world owed him something. The elder explained that his people valued such character deeply. To them, a person's heart was shown not through big declarations or strong words, but through quiet consistency. Samuel did not argue when others tested him. He did not push when a situation required stillness. He did not fear silence. All of these qualities were signs of a steady spirit, one that could be trusted. After a moment of thoughtful quiet, Old Greyhawk shared the purpose of the meeting. His people wanted to build new bonds of trust, ways of working together that could benefit both sides. Traditionally, one way to do that was through forming family ties, marriage alliances that were not forced or demanded but discussed openly with care and agreement. The elder made it clear that this was not something rushed. The families involved had already spoken among themselves and believed this idea could bring good to everyone. Samuel did not respond immediately. He looked at the earth beneath his feet. the soft reddish dust that warmed under the sun. He listened to the sound of the wind brushing through dry grasses. He felt the horses behind him shift their weight quietly. The world around him felt steady, calm, and full of presence. This was not a moment for fear or confusion. It was a moment for honesty. He finally raised his eyes and asked gently, "How would this be done?" The elder nodded, appreciating the thoughtful approach. He explained that Samuel would be offered marriage to two sisters, Atsa and Loma. They were both grown women of the community, respected for their skills, their kindness, and their understanding of shared responsibility. They were not being given away or traded. They had been part of the discussion. They had made their own voices heard. They wanted a cooperative household, one where work was shared fairly and decisions were made by conversation and mutual agreement. Samuel paid close attention to every detail. He knew that misunderstandings could come easily when cultures were different, and he did not want to assume anything. The way the elder spoke made something very clear. Nothing about this was forced or hidden. This was a thoughtful decision made by adults who understood their needs and hopes. The elder went on to explain that in their tradition, when a family formed in this way, a symbolic exchange was made, not a purchase, not a price, but a gesture of respect. In this case, the exchange had been measured to equal $12 worth of goods, things such as cloth, tools, and some dry food supplies. These items were not meant to represent the value of a person. They were meant to show that Samuel understood and honored the responsibility of joining with their family. It was a sign of mutual respect. Samuel understood the meaning. He knew that respect was shown through actions, not only words. There was a moment of quiet after the elder finished speaking. The wind picked up softly again, carrying the smell of warm earth and sun-baked stone. No one hurried Samuel to speak. No one tried to influence his thoughts. They simply gave him space, which was another sign of respect. Samuel thought of his life. The long days on horseback, the quiet nights under stars, the meals eaten alone, the heavy silence that lived inside him sometimes. He thought of the kindness he had seen among the Apache people, the way they cared for each other, the way they taught children to move slowly and thoughtfully, the way they worked with the land instead of trying to force it to change. He also thought of Atsa and Loma. He had seen them before at a trading camp months earlier. One had been carrying woven baskets, the patterns flowing like river water. The other had been speaking to children, helping them learn how to tie bundles of herbs. He remembered their calm presence, their careful gestures, and the soft way they spoke to others. He had not known their names then, but now those memories returned with clear meaning. Samuel finally spoke. His words were steady, simple, and honest. He said that he wanted to meet them properly and speak with them before agreeing. The elder smiled warmly at this. It showed respect. It showed that Samuel understood that marriage was not just a decision made between leaders, but among the people directly involved. Arrangements were made. Atsa and Loma were nearby, gathering desert plants a short walk away. The group moved slowly, giving space for calm introductions. Samuel felt a quiet sense of peace as he walked. He did not feel rushed. He did not feel pressured. The earth beneath his boots seemed solid, steady, and welcoming. When they reached the clearing, Atsa and Loma were waiting, having been told gently what was happening. They stood calmly, their expressions serene but alert. Samuel greeted them with quiet respect. He spoke simply, saying that he was grateful to meet them this way. They responded with equal calm, acknowledging the respect he showed. They sat together in a small circle and spoke for a long time. Not about marriage first, but about life. They spoke of what work each person was used to. They spoke of the land, of the seasons, of how households were kept. They spoke of patience and cooperation. They spoke of how a home was built not with walls but with understanding. Atsa spoke about weaving, how patterns held stories of mountains and rivers. Loma spoke about gathering herbs, how each plant carried a different kind of care. Samuel spoke about ranch work and how he believed every creature deserved to be handled with calm hands. None of them hurried. None of them exaggerated. Their conversation was slow and real. In that time, something gentle began to form between them. Not love in the fast or dramatic sense, but understanding. Understanding is a foundation that lasts longer than sudden emotion. Each of them recognized this. By the time the sun had lowered into late afternoon, they had reached a quiet agreement. They all believed they could build a life of shared respect and shared effort. They all agreed that no one person would lead and another follow. They would learn together and grow together. Samuel returned to Old Greyhawk and spoke simply, clearly, and with certainty. He agreed to the union. The elder nodded with gratitude, not pride. The exchange of goods worth $12 would take place not as a price but as a mark of trust. A household would begin, one rooted in cooperation. It was not the beginning Samuel ever imagined, but it was the beginning that felt right. The kind that grows slowly with meaning. And although none of them could see the future, something quiet and strong had already taken root. The days that followed moved slowly and with gentle care. Samuel did not rush into any change. He knew that starting a shared life with Atza and Loma required patience. This was not just about living in the same place. It was about learning each other's ways, building trust step by step, and letting understanding bloom naturally. So before any final arrangements were made, Samuel stayed near their camp for several days. He helped where help was welcomed, and he observed where space was needed. During this time, Atza, Loma, and Samuel spent many moments in quiet conversation. Some conversations were practical. They discussed where they might live, how daily work would be shared, and what each person's strengths were. Other conversations were softer, about memories, values, and dreams for the future. None of them spoke with big promises or dramatic emotions. They spoke gently, honestly, without trying to impress one another. These were the kinds of talks that form steady ground beneath the feet. Atza was graceful, thoughtful, and observant. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. She liked to listen first before sharing her thoughts, and she noticed the smallest details about the world around her. One afternoon, while Samuel was repairing a saddle strap, she sat beside him and spoke about how weaving patterns held meaning. A diamond shape might represent the mountains. A flowing set of lines could show the river's path. She said that every pattern came from something real and remembered. Samuel admired how her mind wove the land into beauty. Loma was warm, steady, and quietly strong. She did not speak as slowly as Atza, but her words always carried calm understanding. She often gathered herbs from the land, sage, yucca fibers, desert lavender, and she explained their uses to Samuel. She knew which plants could soothe a tired mind and which could help the body heal. She moved through the brush lightly, as if the land recognized her steps. Samuel found comfort in her presence, like being near a warm fire during winter. Samuel, for his part, shared his knowledge of the cattle trails and the rhythms of ranch work. He showed them how he cared for horses, how he always approached animals with steady movement so they would feel safe. Atza and Loma appreciated this patience. They had seen many settlers rush and push, never pausing to understand the spirits and needs of the animals they kept. The three of them learned something important early on. None of them needed to change who they were. Instead, they needed to make space for one another. Samuel did not try to become Apache, and Atza and Loma did not try to become settlers. They allowed each other's traditions to stand side by side like two trees growing from the same soil. One morning, as they prepared to travel to Samuel's homestead area, the weather was gentle. The sky was wide and open, full of soft light. Samuel packed carefully, a few tools, cooking supplies, blankets, rope, and his saddle gear. Atza carried woven baskets filled with dried berries, roots, and herbs. Loma wrapped clothing and simple household items with soft cloth made from plant fibers. They did not carry excess, only what was useful, meaningful, and easy to travel with. Their journey began at a slow pace. They walked when needed, rode when it felt right. The land changed around them as they moved. Flat stretches of sun-warmed desert, low hills with pale grasses, clusters of cedar trees standing like watchful guardians. As they traveled, they did not speak constantly. Silence was shared comfortably. When someone did speak, it was with purpose. At night, they rested near small streams and sheltered spots. Samuel collected wood for a cooking fire, while Atza prepared a meal from dried vegetables and gathered plants. Loma arranged sleeping blankets carefully so that comfort was found even on the ground. Their teamwork felt natural, even though they were still learning each other's rhythms. One evening, after a long day of travel, the sky turned brilliant with sunset. Deep gold, soft pink, hints of purple spreading across the horizon. The three sat together, watching the colors change. None of them needed to explain what they felt. It was clear in the quiet peace between them. Shared silence can speak languages that words never could. Once they reached Samuel's homestead area, the land welcomed them with a familiar stillness. The small cabin Samuel had built stood on a modest patch of earth near a clear water creek. It was not large, but it was strong and clean. The cabin had a sturdy roof and walls made of timber he had cut and shaped himself. There was room to expand, room to build, room to grow. Samuel felt a little shy showing it to them. Not because it was lacking, but because a home is a reflection of one's inner life, and opening it to others felt meaningful. Atsa stepped inside first, looking around slowly. She noticed the way Samuel kept his tools organized, and how the space was neat and cared for. Loma traced her fingers along the smooth wooden table Samuel had made himself. They both smiled, not large smiles, but small warm ones that spoke of appreciation. They did not see this place as something to change entirely, but as a foundation on which something new could be built together. Over the next days, the three began shaping their shared home. Atsa hung woven mats on the walls, adding softness and story to the wood. Loma organized herbs and baskets near the windows, where sunlight could warm and dry them. Samuel built an extra sleeping platform and expanded the storage shelves. They worked slowly, thoughtfully, letting each improvement settle before beginning another. Nothing was rushed. One afternoon, Atsa and Loma went to gather plants near the creek while Samuel repaired a fence that bordered the grazing pasture. As he worked, he thought about how life had shifted so quietly, like the turning of a season. There had been no sudden drama, no loud declarations. Just small steps, honest conversations, steady hands, and choices made with care. He realized that peace does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it grows little by little, like water filling a slow river. The greatest lesson the three were learning was that a household is not built through roles assigned, but through shared respect. Each of them brought their own skills, strengths, and ways of seeing the world. Some days Atsa led by guiding the emotional tone of the household. Some days Loma led by shaping the practical flow of tasks. Some days Samuel led by handling responsibilities with animals and land. Leadership shifted gently, like sunlight moving across the sky. Slowly, comfort settled between them. They learned each other's rhythms. They learned to sense when someone needed quiet or when a warm conversation was welcome. They learned to work side by side without needing to explain every movement. Atsa's weaving patterns brightened the home. Loma's herbs filled it with gentle scent. Samuel's craftsmanship made the space strong and secure. Together they had created something balanced and calm. Neighbors eventually learned of the union and the household being formed. Some were confused, some curious, some uncertain, but Samuel did not concern himself with others' judgments. Atsa and Loma did not either. They were not building this life to impress anyone. They were building it because they believed in it, and a life rooted in sincerity always stands stronger than one built on worrying about outside opinions. Even though they came from different cultures, they found that the core of their values was the same: respect, patience, shared effort, quiet understanding. These are the pillars that hold any family steady, no matter where it forms. As time passed, the land around their home began to feel more alive. The creek shimmered warmly under the sun. The cattle grazed calmly. The wind carried not loneliness now, but belonging. Samuel did not feel that quiet ache inside his heart anymore. Atsa and Loma, too, felt secure in the steady rhythm of their days. Their home had become a place of balance, where no voice was dismissed and no heart went unseen. Their new life was not grand or loud. It did not need to be. It was real, steady, and full of care. And sometimes the most meaningful stories are the quiet ones, shaped not by excitement but by understanding. The seasons began to pass gently around the household, each month shaping their lives a little more than the one before. The land responded slowly to care. When the rains came, even if lightly, the earth took in the water with gratitude. Grass grew in soft patches across the field and the cattle grazed calmly. The creek sang quietly alongside the home, offering clear water for drinking and cooking. Life moved with a steady rhythm, and the three learned how to support each other naturally. Samuel would rise early each morning, often before the sun began lifting the darkness. He would step outside and breathe in the cool morning air, listening to the world waking up. Sometimes the sky still held stars. Other times, sunrise painted the clouds in soft colors that felt like hope. Atsa and Loma always woke soon after. They did not need an alarm. Their bodies knew the rhythm of the land. The mornings were peaceful and well-coordinated. Atza prepared simple breakfasts of warm grains or dried berries, sometimes adding herbs for flavor. Loma tended to the fire and checked drying herbs near the window. Samuel checked the fences and made sure the horses and cattle had water. There was no rush. Everyone knew their place and responsibilities. Their movements worked together like a gentle dance. In time, word of their household reached nearby communities. Some settlers wondered about Samuel's life now. Some spoke curiously, some kindly, and some with confusion because not everyone understood the idea of a family built across cultures. But Samuel did not let outside voices disturb the peace of his home. Atza and Loma were strong in spirit as well, and they did not bend under opinions. They continued their days with patience and grace. Atza found joy in creating woven blankets and baskets. Her hands moved skillfully, each pattern telling a quiet story. People from trading posts began to notice the beauty of her work. Soon Samuel would take some of her creations into town when he traveled for supplies. Others admired the designs, and a small trade began to grow. This helped the household, but it also brought quiet pride to Atza. Her work connected her past to her present. Her art carried memory and identity. Loma tended to a growing garden near the creek. At first, only a few plants took root. The desert soil needed careful attention and patience. But Loma understood how to work with the land rather than force it. She added small stones to help retain moisture, placed plants where the morning sun would help them grow, and spoke kindly to the earth as she worked. Soon, herbs, greens, and edible roots began to flourish. The garden became a symbol of care, slow, gentle, but full of life. Samuel saw how their contributions shaped the home. His heart felt full in a quiet, steady way. He realized that home was not a place built of wood alone. Home was what people built through patience, understanding, and shared effort. Every corner of their life showed this truth. The blankets Atza wove, the herbs Loma dried, the fence posts Samuel reinforced. Each thing held meaning. They did face challenges, of course. Every household does. Some days were difficult. Water would run low during dry stretches. Tools would break when needed most. Weather could shift suddenly, bringing cold winds or strong heat. On some days, they felt tired or uncertain. But their strength did not come from never struggling. It came from how they supported each other through struggle. When one felt overwhelmed, the others listened quietly. When something needed fixing, they solved it together. When doubts appeared, they sat in the open air and talked them through, never raising voices, never blaming. It was not always easy, but the care they had for one another guided them through each moment. One day, a group from Atza and Loma's community came to visit. They brought news, gifts, and stories. The household welcomed them warmly. They shared meals outside under the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek. The visitors saw how Samuel cared for Atza and Loma, not as someone above them, but beside them. They saw respect in the way the three moved together, spoke together, and planned their future. The visitors left with peaceful hearts, knowing that the sisters were living in a safe and supportive home. Months passed, and the seasons continued to change. In the warmer months, Samuel and Loma worked together in the garden, while Atza wove under the shade of the porch. In the cooler months, they gathered closer inside the cabin, sharing stories around the quiet glow of the fire. Each season brought new rhythms, but never broke the balance they had found. There came a time when a neighboring rancher visited, asking for Samuel's help with a small herd that had wandered too far from home. Samuel agreed and prepared to leave for a few days. Before, traveling away had always made him feel the hollow loneliness of open land. But now he felt something different. He felt the pull of returning home again. He realized that he no longer traveled without purpose. He traveled for his household, for Atza, for Loma, for the life they built together. While Samuel was away, Atza and Loma tended the home as usual. They made sure the animals had enough water. They prepared food. They repaired a part of the cabin that had loosened from wind. They worked steadily, secure in their abilities and in the knowledge that Samuel trusted them completely. When Samuel returned, he saw smoke rising gently from the cabin chimney. He saw the woven blankets hanging clean in the sunlight. He saw the garden growing strong, and he saw Atza and Loma waiting with calm smiles. The moment he stepped down from his horse, he understood something deeply. He was returning to a place where he belonged. Life did not rush. It did not need to. The household grew stronger through simple days, shared meals, caring gestures, and unspoken comfort. Their bond was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, peaceful, and rooted in respect that did not waver. Their community saw this change as well. Some settlers began to understand. They saw that cooperation brought more peace than separation. They saw that culture could be shared without being erased. They saw that respect could build bridges where fear once stood. Not everyone changed, of course, but those who watched carefully learned something meaningful. Samuel, Atsa, and Loma did not try to teach others loudly. They did not try to speak over anyone. They simply lived with quiet integrity, and sometimes that is the strongest teaching of all. Years later, when neighbors remembered this time, they spoke of it softly. They said, "Those three showed what it looks like when people choose patience instead of pride. They showed how a home can be built out of understanding, and that understanding was the strongest part of their life together." The years continued to move slowly across the land. Just as the sun rises and sets each day without hurry, time did not rush their lives, and they did not rush time. Samuel, Atsa, and Loma had built a home that felt steady and warm, a place where the world seemed softer than the harsh landscape that surrounded it. Their days were filled with small actions, quiet tasks, and simple joys that together formed a life full of meaning. There were mornings when Samuel would step outside and stand on the porch just to watch the sunrise. The light would stretch across the fields, turning the earth golden for a few beautiful minutes before bright daylight settled in. Sometimes Atsa would join him, standing silently beside him, wrapped in a woven blanket she had made herself. Her presence was calm and thoughtful. She did not need to fill the air with words. The silence between them was peaceful, a kind of language all its own. Loma might still be inside warming tea, preparing the morning meal, or checking herbs drying near the window. Each person moved naturally into the day, like leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. During those quiet mornings, Samuel would think about how different his life was now compared to the years before. He remembered the lonely nights under the open sky, when his only companion was the cry of distant coyotes or the sound of wind brushing across the plains. He had accepted loneliness then, thinking it was simply part of who he was. But now he understood something deeper. Loneliness had not been his nature. It had been a space waiting to be filled. And now it was filled with warmth, companionship, and shared purpose. Atsa felt this change too. Her weaving became more colorful, her designs more detailed. She often told stories through her patterns, stories of the land and the lives growing together upon it. Her work no longer carried only memories from the past. It now held symbols of the present. She would weave small shapes that represented the creek behind the house, the blooming garden, the horses grazing peacefully. Her work was not just craft. It was a record of the life they were shaping together. Loma also found joy in watching the garden grow. Each season the plants came up stronger, as if the earth itself responded to her patience and care. She knew which herbs to plant for tea, which roots to grow for meals, which leaves to gather for healing. Her hands seemed to hold a quiet understanding of nature's rhythm. She taught Samuel how to read the signs of new growth, how the leaves tilt themselves toward the sun in quiet gratitude. She taught him that growth, whether in plants or in people, required time and gentle attention. Sometimes children from nearby families would visit, often drawn by the peaceful feeling of the place. Atsa and Loma would teach them how to weave small bracelets or how to identify safe plants and herbs. Samuel would show them how to move slowly around horses so they felt safe and calm. The children would laugh, run through the grass, and sit near the creek tossing stones to see how far they could skip. Their laughter filled the air like birdsong, bringing even more life to the home. Neighbors began to speak differently about the household. Instead of confusion or curiosity, they began to express respect. People noticed how strong the garden grew, how beautifully the woven blankets looked, how healthy the cattle remained. They saw that cooperation between cultures could bring not just peace but prosperity. Without preaching or trying to convince anyone, Samuel, Atsa, and Loma taught others something valuable simply by living their truth. There were evenings when the three of them would sit outside near a small fire, listening to the sounds of the night. The crickets sang. The creek whispered. The sky stretched wide above them, full of stars. Sometimes they would talk about their day. Other times they would share thoughts about the future. And sometimes they simply sat together, quiet and content. In those moments they felt deeply connected, not because life was perfect, but because they faced it together, side by side. Over time, children came into the household, bringing new energy, curiosity, and laughter. The children grew up knowing 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 ways of understanding the world. They learned to weave from etched, to gather herbs and tend the garden from Loma, and to care for the land and animals from Samuel. They did not see difference as something to separate people. They saw it as something that gave life more color and depth. The children often played by the creek, their laughter echoing through the air like a warm song carried by the wind. Samuel would watch them sometimes and feel his heart grow full in a quiet, deep way. He knew that the life they had built was not just for themselves. It was something that would continue into the next generation. The home they created was not simply made of wood and earth. It was built from patience, respect, understanding, and kindness. These were foundations that did not break even in difficult times. Etched and Loma would smile when they watched the children too. They saw the continuation of their family's stories, their ancestors' lessons, their culture living onward. The children learned old songs, old stories, old ways of honoring the land. They also learned new traditions from Samuel's side, blending everything gently, like threads woven together into a strong fabric that could not easily be torn. Years later, when people in the surrounding lands spoke about Samuel's household, they spoke with warm voices. They said that the family living by the creek understood something important. They understood that peace does not come from being the same. It comes from respecting differences and allowing them to live side by side. They understood that love does not need grand gestures or loud declarations. It can grow quietly, day by day like a plant stretching towards sunlight. They understood that strength does not come from force. It comes from patience, kindness, and steady hearts. The story of the $12 exchange was told many times, but not as a story of cost or trade. Instead, it became a symbol. People said, $12 was not the price of anything. It was simply the beginning of a promise to care, a promise to listen, a promise to build a life of respect and harmony. Over time, the number 12 became a reminder that sometimes the simplest things can start the most meaningful journeys. When Samuel grew older, his hair took on streaks of silver, much like old Greyhawks had. His movement slowed a bit, but his spirit stayed steady. Etched and Loma also grew older, their hands carrying both the wisdom of time and the softness that comes from living a life of care. The 3 of them would still sit by the creek, watching the sunlight dance on the water surface, remembering how life had unfolded so gently. Their children grew up and began building homes of their own, carrying with them the lessons they had learned. Some stayed nearby. Some traveled to new places. But no matter where they went, they carried inside them the quiet understanding their parents had taught them, that a good life is built not on what you take from the world, but on what you give back to it. And so, the household by the creek remained a symbol for many. A symbol that respect can bridge any distance, a symbol that understanding can grow between different cultures, a symbol that kindness is stronger than fear, a symbol that a family can be built in many forms as long as the foundation is care. The story lived on, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was real, gentle, and true. It lived in woven blankets, in the herbs growing by the creek, in the clear water reflecting sky, in the laughter of children, and in the hearts of those who remembered. And that is how a simple beginning marked by $12 of goods grew into a life of peace that lasted across years, seasons, and generations.